You can listen to The Professional Left wherever you get your podcasts, on Netroots Radio, or at our website, proleftpod.com, where you can also contribute to this podcast. There's a PayPal button at our website, or you can mail us a letter and or contribution at P.O. Box 9133, Springfield, Illinois, 62791.
This is the podcast for the week of June 7th, 2024. It's not safe for work.
Recorded live from the Cornfield Resistance, where we're kind of wondering how much a full-page convict felon Donald Trump ad in the Springfield State Journal-Register would cost us. Probably not that much. It's The Professional Left with Driftglass and Blue Gal.
So it's a lovely day here in Springfield, Illinois. The birds are chirping. The cicadas are speaking very loudly to each other. Everything's green. We've had tons of rain. And the corn is coming up. But yesterday we had a hell of a storm. It was over quick, but it was intense.
It was very intense. It got me out of bed around 5 in the morning or so. The whole house was shaking. The power went off for a minute or so, so I had to reset all the clocks. Oh, poor me. The streets flooded up to the sidewalks, and there was down tree limbs up and down the street. But everything's fine. Everything's fine. The water eventually receded. No damage to our place. And like by 10 o'clock in the morning or so, people were out with their saws and loppers, cutting up the fallen limbs and stacking them at the curb. So to start things off today, we're going to take you back 1 year ago this month to remind you of what was going on right here at the world headquarters of the Cornfield Resistance during the last week of June of 2023.
Now, the other thing that you can see driving around central Illinois are down power lines up in Springfield, where they have the city-operated City Water, Light, and Power. They have extensive outages as well. Nearly 40,000 customers up there out of power. That's almost 50% of their base. So, like I said, extensive damage all throughout this part of the state.
That was the great Springfield derecho.
Mm-hmm.
The day that everything very quickly went completely dark at noon.
Mm-hmm.
The sirens went off twice, and 5 tornadoes tore through the area. We lost power for almost a week, and the weather was sweltering. We charged our phones and our tool batteries at a local coffee shop and the public library. Driftglass went out and got a battery-operated fan, which provided some relief. Eventually, we had to move into a hotel for a couple days until the power came back on.
Yeah, and thousands and thousands of trees were knocked down all over the area, including several on our block. And it was incredibly frustrating, honestly, that I had 3 different kinds of power saws and 3 hand saws all locked up very securely in a garage that I couldn't open because of the power outage. Now, we were very grateful for the support we got from friends and from listeners who sent along a couple of little solar and hand-crank battery chargers so that we could at least keep our phones on and keep track of what was going on in the rest of the world, because we had no idea how extensive this damage was or what was going on elsewhere. And we learned a valuable lesson, didn't we, Blue Gal? Getting a full-size generator that could run the whole house, and then getting the whole house upgraded so that we could switch over to that generator if we need to, is well outside of our budget at any point in the foreseeable future. But now we do have a storm kit with the aforementioned battery chargers and that fan, a small battery inverter that we could use with our lithium batteries to run a lamp or two, and a couple of computers. And I've also brought a couple of saws into the house, just in case. So why did we do all this? Why? Because we've already lived through a disaster that showed us that things can go very bad very quickly. And that we were very lucky that our family wasn't injured and our house was undamaged. So we have taken a few prudent precautions should, something really bad like that happen again.
That sounds like a metaphor, Driftglass.
It's a metaphor, Blue Gal. I started the show with a metaphor. Because that leads us to this long article by McKay Coppins in The Atlantic entitled, "What Europe Fears. American Allies See a Second Trump Term as All But Inevitable." And this is a quote from deep inside the article by Victoria Nuland, who served until recently as Undersecretary of Political Affairs at the State Department. Quote, "The anxiety is massive. Foreign counterparts would say it to me straight up. Quote, The first Trump election, maybe people didn't understand who he was, or it was an accident. A second Trump election, we will never trust you again, unquote.
We will never trust you again.
And why should they? Why should they?
Why should they?
Mm-hmm.
The article continues. The undercurrent of dread at Truman Hall was not unique. I encountered it in nearly every conversation I had while traveling through Europe this spring. In capitals across the continent, from Brussels to Berlin, Warsaw to Tallinn, leaders and diplomats expressed a sense of alarm bordering on panic at the prospect of Donald Trump's reelection.
Mm-hmm.
We're in a very precarious place, one senior NATO official told me. He wasn't supposed to talk about such things on the record, but it was hardly a secret. The largest armed conflict in Europe since World War II was grinding into its third year. The Ukrainian counteroffensive had failed, and Russia was gaining momentum. $60 billion in desperately needed military aid for Ukraine had been stalled for months in the dysfunctional, I think the Atlantic editors misspelled Republican, U.S. Congress. And perhaps most ominous, America, the country with by far the biggest military in NATO, appeared on the verge of re-electing a president who has repeatedly threatened to withdraw the U.S. from the alliance. Almost every official I spoke with believed that Trump is going to win. The Germans are bracing for Trump's return in other ways. Inside the foreign ministry, officials have mapped out a range of policy areas likely to be destabilized by his reelection. NATO, Ukraine, tariffs, climate change, and are writing detailed proposals for how to deal with the fallout. Multiple people told me. Can Trump's moods be predicted? Who are his confidants? And how can the government get close to them? Unquote.
Yeah, this is a very long article. We're not going to read the whole thing, but I did want to also mention the section on Warsaw, Poland. The section on Warsaw, Poland begins with this quote, "What the fuck is happening in the United States?" Unquote. That's by Agnieszka Homanska, who was seemingly startled by her own outburst, slowly placing her hands on the table as if to calm herself. Sorry for being so frank. Homanska exhibited none of the casual contempt for America often associated with young people in other European capitals. In the history she grew up learning, Americans were the good guys, defeating the Nazi occupiers, tearing down the Iron Curtain. Surveys consistently find that Poland is the most pro-America country in Europe. But the Trump era punctured Homanska's image of America, as it did for many younger Poles. Trump's refusal to concede the 2020 election was jarring to those who saw the U.S. as an aspirational democracy. The storming of the Capitol on January 6th was broadcast on every television, she told me. Trump's criminal charges and his recent conviction on 34 felony counts in a Manhattan court have made the news here too. Quote, people don't understand why Trump can still run for president, unquote, which is a goddamn great question.
Yeah, it is a goddamn great question.
Yep.
How is it possible as a convicted felon that he can run for president? In our last episode, we mentioned this from Bloomberg News, quote, rushing to back Trump, verdict be damned. A growing number of financial elites are throwing their weight behind Trump, who was found guilty in the first criminal trial of a former U.S. president. What you are seeing among some financial elites and among European governments is a frightening but understandable reaction to the fact that the Republican Party is a fascist party.
Mm-hmm.
And that tens of millions of Americans are thrilled about that. Today, we're going to talk about the presence of this huge and well-funded American fascist movement that has been growing in plain sight for decades, and the warping effect that movement has had on everything else. And to make things easier to understand, and, I realize we used the derecho earlier as a metaphor.
As a metaphor.
A metaphor. We're gonna talk about the omnipresent fascist movement in terms of the Wachowskis' movie The Matrix. Because it makes sense. And we're going to specifically talk about how various groups interact with and are affected by the Republican fascist matrix.
Yeah, the metaphor of the derecho was European capital leaders are bringing their tools into the house because if the storm hits again, they don't want to be caught, naked out there with no way unprepared.
Yeah.
So they're preparing for us to be a bunch of fuck ups and ruin the world, which is not an unreasonable thing to prepare for. Now, getting back to the Matrix, there are a small number of people who are actual agents of American fascism. These are your Steve Bannons and your Tim Pools and your Stephen MIllerses. By the way, today Steve Bannon, it was announced, is going to jail, heading off to prison July 1st. So
he'll
that's
get out
good news.
just around the time of your birthday, Driftglass.
That's great. Great birthday present for this guy here. These are your stone cold Nazis who have a very clear agenda. And then there's this much larger group, the reprogrammable meatbags of the Republican base, who have no direct Matrix analog, but the character of Cypher from the movie comes the closest.
Do we have a deal, Mr. Reagan?
I know this steak doesn't exist. I know that when I put it in my mouth, the Matrix is telling my brain that it is juicy and delicious. After 9 years, you know what I realize? Ignorance is bliss.
Then we have a deal.
I don't want to remember nothing. Nothing. You understand? I don't want to be rich. Someone important.
Now, these creatures may or may not know that they're being lied to every day. I mean, we can't possibly know for sure. They may occasionally notice that what they believe is fucking nuts, but they don't care. They eat big, juicy, delicious lies every day, and they ask for seconds, and they have trained their brains to ignore every inconsistency and every inconvenient memory because making liberals cry by any means necessary takes precedent over everything else.
And that steak tastes so good.
So good. I know it's just the Matrix telling my brain that it tastes good, that there's a steak there. I don't care. I don't fucking care. And they don't care. They just don't care anymore.
Hannity makes me feel important, so I'm going to keep on watching. Right.
That's right.
However, most people go through their days oblivious to any of this.
Yeah.
Have you ever stood and stared at it, marveled at its beauty, its genius? Billions of people just living out their lives, oblivious.
It's kind of like, I'm an independent.
Yeah. And that's most people. Not even that. I'm an independent, because independent's a lie people tell themselves to get away with not paying attention. It's the people who are oblivious to all of this, who have no idea how their country's run or who the president is or who the Supreme Court is or anything. People who are just watching Survivor and watching MILF Island or whatever, and are just tuned out to the whole fact that their democracy is balanced on a knife's edge. That's most people. Then there are the smaller number of people who are aware that something is wrong, but they can't name what it is. They can't or won't name what it is, or they're just afraid to name what it is because facing reality would ruin their lives and their sense of security.
Let me tell you why you're here. You're here because you know something. What you know you can't explain, but you feel it. You felt it your entire life, that there's something wrong with the world. You don't know what it is, but it's there, like a splinter in your mind, driving you mad.
Then there's this even smaller group, and you might be familiar with these people. These are people who have learned to actually see the Matrix as it is operating in the real world in real time. And that's us, kids. That's you and me and the people who listen to this podcast and the crazy liberals who've been warning about this for decades. That's us. And the reason foreign leaders are freaking out now is that they've never looked beyond our hype about ourselves to take a good, hard look at what the hell's actually been going on inside the GOP for decades, decades and decades. We've been growing our own native fascist party in this country for decades, and everyone on the right who helped build it and everyone on the mainstream media who helped ignore it bears a share of the blame. Now, a note here about polling questions, because polling questions drive us crazy. Mm-hmm. Not the fact that they're every day someone's shouting new polls at us, but the fact that so many polls are framed in such a way, the questions are framed in such a way as to be complete bullshit, to tell the audience what the news outlet wants them to hear. So there's a whole big thing now about the faith in our institutions and how many people, majority of people are losing faith in our institutions. And those polling stories put us in mind of the remarkably similar polls from 2010 or so about most people hate Obamacare. Mm-hmm. Man, they were pushing the shit out of that story back in 2010. Most people hate Obamacare. And you know what they never did, Blue Gal? The savvy pundits never bothered to dig 1 inch below the surface and ask, why do you hate Obamacare? Because they would have found very quickly there's actually two groups of people who hated Obamacare or were disappointed with it or didn't like it or didn't trust it. One group was called Republicans, and they didn't like it because Barack Obama was going to kill their white grandma. They didn't like it because it was Barack Obama, and Barack Obama was a black guy who was doing stuff, and they hated that, and they hated him, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
And just so you know, we've had quite a bit of technical difficulties recording this show.
Hello, Hal Sparks. How you doing?
So we're now sitting in the same room and recording on Audacity as a monofile. So
just like old-time radio stars.
There you go. Mm-hmm. There you go. So, Driftglass, you were talking about Obamacare and having two different polling, the same polling question, but two different reactions.
Yeah, just
right?
that if you had bothered to dip below the surface for the Affordable Care Act, why people were unhappy with it, you would have found some people hated it because it was done by a black guy who was trying to kill their white grandma. It was Obama, and everything Obama did was evil. And there was another completely separate group of liberals and progressives who were angry that it didn't include a public option. Because, thank you, Joe Lieberman, or it didn't include, it wasn't Medicare for all, didn't go far enough. Both groups were unsatisfied with the Affordable Care Act for entirely different reasons. But the media lumped them together and said, see, most people don't like the Affordable Care Act. Therefore, the Affordable Care Act must be a bad thing, feeding into the Republican talking point. And they're doing exactly the same thing with the whole faith in our institutions thing, which is, you know why Republicans don't have faith in our institutions? Because they're all rigged, Blue Gal. Because they're all being paid for by George Soros. Everything is rigged all the time. Anything that doesn't go their way, it's part of the vast Joe Biden conspiracy because he is a vicious, evil puppet master in charge of everything.
Who's being paid by China money.
China money. Plus, he's a feeble old man who can't, string three words together. So, again, that was the same with Obama. Obama was a tyrant who has his boot on your throat, except he was also a feckless idiot who couldn't get anything done. But they believe both things at once because they're Republicans. That's one group of people who have no faith in our institutions. There's another group who has no faith in our institutions called liberals, like us. And our lack of faith in our institutions is because our institutions aren't holding the crazy Nazis responsible for all the shit they do. 3 Supreme Court justices at least committed perjury to get onto the Supreme Court so they could take away a woman's right to choose. And now that we know for a fact that they did that because they did that, the answer is, well, guess there's nothing can be done. They're on there for life. Can't remove them. Can't touch Clarence Thomas, even though he's as corrupt as fuck. Can't touch Sam Alito because, Pope Sam, job for life. Nothing can be done about that. So the courts have been stacked with people who are going to let the fascists get away with murder. That's why we don't trust them. And the newspapers are all looking the other way or pretending both sides are equally to blame, which is why we don't trust them. And we have, I don't know, Bluegill, what do you think? 20 years worth of evidence that this is the case?
Yep.
So, yeah, if you look at the whole argument of losing faith in our institutions, yes, a majority of people have lost faith in our institutions. Again, two groups for entirely different reasons. One group of Republicans for reasons that are insane. Another group of people on the left who have very valid reasons for doubting the viability of our institutions because they won't hold the insane people accountable. Now I'm going to step off my soapbox and turn it over to my beautiful wife.
Yeah. You probably already heard the story. In fact, if you listened to Tuesday's show, you did hear about this from the Dallas Morning News, how a couple found themselves tangled in Texas' strict abortion laws after miscarriage. The woman was allegedly denied a surgical abortion option at two facilities after her fetus's heartbeat stopped. Now, you can search this whole long article and find the word blood 7 times, Texas more than 20 times, abortion more than 20 times, state 7 times, and court 7 times. You know what word is never mentioned at all? Hat tip again to airbag moments. You will not read the word Republican. We see what you're doing, Dallas Morning News, and we know what part of the matrix you represent.
We certainly do. Now, Eric Wemple of the Washington Post actually took on his own paper this week, which was pretty incredible and deserves a mention on this powerful podcast of ours, which is now being broadcast in beautiful monotone or stereo monotonic. Anyway, this is from Eric Wemple. Quote, for the Post, a supreme black eye. Deference to Justice Alito hands a scoop to the New York Times. It's one thing to get scooped when your competitors bust their humps, that's true, or when they catch a lucky break one way or another. It's quite another thing to get scooped when the story has sat in your notebook for 3.5 years, and then it goes viral. Oh no. This very scenario played out in recent weeks for the Post, which had sat back and watched the New York Times nail down a precious interview precious exclusive whose epicenter is a leisurely drive from its K Street newsroom. Under the byline of Jody Cantor, the New York Times reported on May 16th that an upside-down American flag, a symbol popular among pro-Donald Trump election deniers, flew from the pole of the Alito residence after the January 6th Capitol riots. A story with ongoing political and judicial implications. 9 days later, the Post disclosed that then Supreme Court reporter Robert Barnes, who has since retired from the Post, had arrived at the justice's residence on January 20th, 2021, just as the Alitos were leaving home. He spoke to Supreme Court Justice Samuel A. Alito and his wife, Martha Ann Alito, about the flag, unquote. They had the story. They had all the details. And they sat on it for 3.5 years, presumably because they didn't want to make Pope Alito mad at them.
Well, and the Pope Alito's wife, they thought, was a nut job.
Right.
And so they didn't want to make, her mental illness part of the story. No. However, her mental illness was being a Fox News watching Republican. And they didn't want to deal with that either. I guess I have a little bit of an issue with Eric Wemple, though, Driftglass, and that is that his issue with the problem at the Post is that they missed a scoop rather than you should have defended democracy better.
Oh, yeah.
It's a problem for the newspaper to miss scoops because that's our real job is to always have a scoop.
And this has happened all over the place. I mean, this is Bob Woodward sitting on lethal COVID information that he got directly from Donald Trump because he had a book deal. How many of these reporters have sat on how much information while they were getting paid by the newspapers because they were waiting to make it a juicy part of their much more profitable book deal? That's not journalism. And again,
that's shooting a dog.
Yeah.
That's what that is, literally. Yeah. Yes.
And we see you doing it.
Yeah.
We can see you doing this. I know you don't care. I know you don't give a shit about what we say or do out here in the real world, but we can actually see the bullshit happening. It's like watching an ant farm. We can see you carrying the sand up the hill. We can see you building your shelters and homes. And we're not happy about it. You're screwing this country up, which may be why, I don't know, European leaders are really worried about this country because one of the institutions that has completely failed us is the constitutionally chartered free press that's supposed to protect us from these things, not profit from them.
Right. Right.
Anyway.
From the always amazing Michelle Goldberg. One of the few saving graces of the New York fucking Times is Michelle Goldberg. She wrote this week, quote, speaking to the Fox hosts, Trump denied saying the words that were the refrain to his first presidential campaign. I didn't say lock her up. That, of course, is a preposterous lie. The kind that demonstrates Trump's strongman ability to get his followers to accept absurdities. And lock her up, it's important to remember, was never just rhetoric. As the Mueller report revealed, Trump demanded that his first Attorney General, Jeff Sessions, who'd recused himself from investigations involving the 2016 campaign, go after Clinton. According to Sessions, the president asked him to reverse his recusal so that Sessions could direct the Department of Justice to investigate and prosecute Hillary Clinton, the Mueller report said. Eventually, attempting to placate his boss, Sessions tapped U.S. Attorney John Huber of Utah to probe the right's allegations about the Clinton Foundation, but Huber came up empty.
Womp womp.
Sessions' replacement, William Barr, proved more willing to bend ethical rules to do Trump's bidding. Jeffrey Berman, a Republican who served as U.S. Attorney for the Southern District of New York until Trump fired him, described Barr's Justice Department in his book, Holding the Line. Demands came down from Maine justice that were overtly political. Among the most outrageous of them, pressure to pursue baseless criminal charges against John Kerry, who had served in the Obama administration as Secretary of State, he wrote. Eventually, during Trump's efforts to overturn the 2020 election, Barr discovered lines that even he wouldn't cross. Now, you know I love Michelle Goldberg, but I would say in that instance that Bill Barr saw that the boat was on fire.
Yeah.
And so he got into a life raft and left.
And he's since tried to crawl back on. Now that the winds have shifted.
Yeah, no, he's
completely immoral.
garbage. He's
He is
garbage
completely
person.
immoral.
Yes.
Who was deployed during, during Whitewater?
Yeah.
You know, he's the go-to guy for covering up the criminality of the Republican Party under a veil of judicial temperament. And the reason he got away with it is because all the smart, savvy people thought, well, Barr's a competent professional.
Right, competent professional.
We're just going to, he's an honorable man. You might be a Republican, but he's one of the good ones. We can trust him. And it turns out, no, they're all
you can't.
bad.
You
They're
can't.
all terrible.
And the other thing is that this is just Clinton, and I mean Bill Clinton redo.
Yeah.
This is, we can't find anything on Bill Clinton. Whitewater is a nothing burger, and yet we're going to fire the special prosecutor who found nothing and hire another one and keep going. And Trump is not inventing anything here.
No.
That's the important thing.
He's
All right.
refining it.
He's refining it. So just finishing up with Goldberg. The point here is not that Trump and his lackeys are lying about his record. It would be more newsworthy if they weren't. What's important is that Trump has already tried to use the power of the presidency to harass his enemies, and his allies have since identified the choke points in the system that previously thwarted him. As Reuters reported, people close to Trump have a two-part plan to turn the nation's top law enforcement body into an attack dog for conservative causes. First, they want to flood the Department of Justice with stalwart conservatives unlikely to say no to controversial orders from the White House. Then they want to restructure it so key decisions are concentrated in the hands of administration loyalists rather than career bureaucrats, unquote. And that's Project 2025. They've written this up and published it.
Yeah, it's a dictatorship.
Yeah.
It's a blueprint for a dictatorship. And let's face it, the Republican rank and file are thrilled with it. Mm-hmm. They love this idea. This, from Oliver Darcy at Reliable Sources, is another story which should be entitled, "We Can See What You're Doing." Quote, "The Wall Street Journal owes its readers and the public better." Never going to happen. They do employ Peggy Noonan, but nice headline. Back to the article. The business broadsheet published and hyped a story Wednesday declaring that behind closed doors, President Joe Biden has shown signs of slipping. The story questioned Biden's mental acuity, playing into the GOP-propelled narrative that the 81-year-old president lacks the fitness to hold the nation's highest office. But an examination of the report reveals a glaring problem. Most of the sources reporters Anna Linsky and Siobhan Hughes relied on were Republicans. In fact, buried in the story, the reporters themselves acknowledged that they had drawn their sweeping conclusions based on GOP sources who obviously have an incentive to make comments that will damage Biden's candidacy. Quote, most of those who said Biden performed poorly were Republicans, but some Democrats said that he showed signs of his age in several of those exchanges, Linsky and Hughes conceded. The duo also noted that they had spoken to sources in the administration who found no fault with the way Biden conducted himself in meetings in which they were present. And a side note here, all of those Democrats, including people like Nancy Pelosi, who were interviewed, who said, Biden's doing fine. Behind closed doors, he's fine. He's sharp. He knows what he's talking about. None of those people were in the article. They were all edited out of the article because they didn't play into the Wall Street Journal's sleazy story, the sleazy story they wanted to tell. Back to the article. Republicans accusing their political foe of lacking the mental fitness to hold office is nothing surprising. Such accusations are made every night on Fox News. And Donald Trump, who at 77 years old has also shown plenty of signs of waning mental faculties, including repeatedly falling asleep at his own high-stakes hush money trial, has made the accusations a centerpiece of his campaign. In other words, these accusations from the right aren't exactly news. It is a little surprising that the Wall Street Journal thought it was breaking news when congressional Republicans told them the same false claims they've been spouting on Fox News for years, White House spokesperson Andrew Barnes said. But it's also telling that the only individuals willing to smear the president in this story are political opponents afraid to use their names, plus one proven liar, unquote.
Yep.
Yeah.
I want to riff for a little bit about the Matrix and some of the things that we see that perhaps other people don't see because we're just looking at it all the time. In particular, the rebranding of the Republican Party over and over again.
Yes.
And we recognize that you don't dare call it Trumpism.
No.
This is the Republican Party, whether it's Up With People or the Tea Party or whatever they're going to turn into when Trump takes all the money and runs. And that's the other thing we see, is Trump bankrupting the Republican establishment and blackmailing them, obviously. But the mainstream media dare not speak that name until the election is over because they are invested in making sure this is a horse race. It reminds me of Sarah Palin.
Yeah.
And Sarah Palin not knowing that Africa is a country. And all of that came out on Fox News the day after the election.
Africa is not a country.
Africa is not Africa. She said Africa was a country.
That's right.
Yes.
She did not know that it wasn't a country. That it was many, many, many countries. Just ask Junior Dude. He'll tell you all of them.
All of them. Yes. Yes. So, but her absolute ignorance of anything was not discussed by mainstream media until after the election. And the day after, that came out all over the place.
Well, and Donald Rumsfeld was the greatest Secretary of State in American history.
And was never going to step down.
Was never going to step down until after the 2006 election, the day after, as I recall.
Yep.
Bush thanked him for his service and he left.
Yeah.
Because it's just, you have to keep putting on that brave face until the results come in. And then you can, let your belt out a little bit and relax and tell a few truths and clean it up a little bit. But it is so clear that the media only learned one thing from 2016, and that is that there's nobody out there to hold them accountable.
Right.
That nobody's going to come the only people who are going to come knocking at their door, demanding that they do something, are people wearing brown shirts and MAGA hats.
Yeah.
And
the other people who want to hold them accountable are liberals, and who cares about them?
Right. Liberals won't show up at my house with guns.
Right.
They won't threaten my family.
Right.
They won't drag me out in public. They might say some mean things about me on Twitter. And, occasionally in a restaurant, they might say, no, you can't have that cheese platter. And that will be reported widely as the lack of civility and the destruction of American civilization, etc.
Sure.
But the people who are actually ready to go out and do violence to journalists for reporting the truth are Republicans, are MAGA Republicans. And I have to believe that at least some of them are just afraid for their lives and afraid for the lives of their family.
Yeah, because of the death threats. Yeah.
Peter Baker's not afraid. Peter Baker knows that, he's got a job for life at the New York Times, and he can just jack off as much as he wants and screw around as much as he wants, and no one's going to fire him. There's a whole bunch of people who have jobs for life who 90% of which you might have noticed were all reporting on the same garbage during the Bush administration. There was never any accountability after the Iraq War. There was never any accountability after the Obama administration and the complete capitulation of the media to the why won't Obama lead bullshit. And they figured out nobody's going to hold them accountable. The only people they're accountable to are their bosses who want them to do this and their advertisers who want eyeballs.
Yeah.
So anyway.
On that note, Driftglass, let's do a news roundup.
Yes.
The President Bidening continues. From the Washington Post, convicted felon Donald Trump again suggested that he'd prosecute his political opponents if he's reelected. Quote, "It's a terrible, terrible path that they're leading us to, and it's very possible that it's going to happen to them," Trump said while discussing his 34 felony convictions. Unquote. Very unfair.
Very unfair. Might have to happen to them too, because fairness. Senate Republicans blocked a Democratic measure to protect the federal right to access contraception nationwide. The vote on the Right to Contraception Act was 51 to 39, falling short of the 60 votes needed to defeat a Republican filibuster.
Wisconsin charged 3 people involved in the fake elector scheme to overturn the results of the 2020 election to keep now convicted felon Trump in office. By the way, he's a convicted felon. Attorney General Josh Cowell charged Kenneth Cheesebro, Jim Trupus, and Michael Roman with 1 felony count each of conspiracy to commit forgery.
Now, here's an example of institutional failure. Speaker Mike Johnson has floated a 3-pronged approach to punish the Department of Justice for Trump's felony conviction. With House Republicans' bullshit impeachment hearings going nowhere, Johnson announced a plan to use the appropriations process, legislation, and congressional oversight to rein in Trump's prosecutors at both the federal and state levels by, wait for it, limiting funding for the FBI, federal prosecutors, and state prosecutors or states' attorneys general involved in lawfare. Defunding the police. Johnson suggested that, quote, all those things will be happening vigorously because we have to do that because the stakes are too high and because people are losing faith in what, Blue Gal?
Our institutions.
In our institutions, unquote.
Trump, in a phone interview with Newsmax, because he was sitting on the crapper, June 4th on the, what? E. Jean Carroll case? He opened his pie hole about this again.
He can't let this shit go. He just can't.
Quote, "I've never met this woman. I don't know this woman, and I'm supposed to pay a ridiculous amount of money for a fictional story," unquote.
Back to court.
Back to court with you, Donald.
Yeah. Some judge is just going to have to literally ball gag him and throw him in a cell for 30 days.
Yep.
And make him eat, stuff that isn't hamburgers.
Right.
And after 2 days of withdrawal from Adderall and spray tan, he'll be a mess. Trump Veep contender and close ally Byron Donalds says life was better for Black Americans under Jim Crow. By the way, Byron Donalds, black guy, just so you know. And he really, really, really doesn't want to be a black person. He really wants to be a white guy. He really is his Uncle Ruckus.
Yeah.
Go look up Uncle Ruckus and you'll see Byron Donalds' face smiling back at you. Self-loathing, just the worst kind of person, just wallowing in his hypocrisy and contempt because he's so horny for Trump's approval.
Yep. From CNN, quote, "The federal judge overseeing convicted felon." Did I mention he's a convicted felon? Donald Trump's trial involving willful retention of classified documents in violation of the Espionage Act again abruptly changed the court's schedule. Judge Eileen Cannon, and we do not have any trust in the institution of that courtroom,
No, we do not.
granted Trump's request to allow third parties not involved in the case to argue whether the appointment of Jack Smith as special counsel is legal, unquote. And legal experts across the country are just baffled, except she just wants to delay this forever.
Yeah, if you want a shorter version of that, there's this Salon headline. Quote, not normal at all. Legal experts say Judge Cannon's absurd ruling shows that she's an absolute hack. And yes, she is. Yes, she sure is.
I'm sorry to bring this to you, but this is Donald Trump on the subject of heaven.
Yeah.
From the Huffington Post, I do very well with evangelicals. I love the evangelicals, Trump said, then unleashed a wild word salad. Religion is such a great thing. It keeps you, there's something to be good about. You want to be good, he said. When you have something like that, you want to be good. You want to go to heaven, okay? You want to go to heaven. If you don't have heaven, you almost say, what's the reason? Why do I have to be good? Let's not be good. What difference does it make?
I just have a feeling that last line is what goes through his mush brain every night. Let's not be good.
Yeah.
What difference does it make? After all, 70 plus million Americans made this guy president. They made a narcissistic, racist lunatic the leader of the free world.
Because he's not a politician.
That's just injecting it straight into his brain.
Yep.
Anyway, and we thought we'd end the news roundup with this because it just cracked me up, especially since it follows Donald Trump's exegesis on the existence of heaven and the need for it in a theological sense. This is from a site called Grace for Single Parents. 17 things Christians get wrong about Christianity. Included are the following things from the list. Following a religion does not automatically make you a good person. Yeah, we know that. Also, there are rules. Yeah. Attending church on Sunday does not make you a good Christian. A true Christian never looks down on someone who has sinned, particularly if you are assuming an air of moral superiority. Also, no one is perfect. Also, heaven should not be the main focus. Also, try not to focus on hell either, or, tell non-Christians they're going to hell. And finally, the Bible should never be used as a weapon. Yeah.
No, I'll just use my copy of War and Peace as a weapon.
Yeah.
A little heavier.
Now, we do have some local news, and it's a lot of fun, so relax, crack one open, and enjoy this story from the Democratic Party of Illinois. You might have missed that conservative think tank Illinois Policy Institute ran a $2.5 million deficit in 2022, an ironic shortfall for a group that claims to be experts on budgets. Quote, with the loss of mega donors, including Dick Uihlein, IPI has struggled to bring in revenue as they remain deeply out of touch with Illinois voters. Their deficit spending has failed to yield noticeable results. IPI cited increased expenses on Amendment 1, the Workers' Right Amendment, as a reason for their debt, but their spending was futile as Illinois voters supported the amendment despite their efforts. Former IPI benefactor and one-term Republican governor Bruce Rauner, Governor Hedge Fund, held the state's budget hostage for years. Remember that blue gal?
I do.
Remember him holding the state's budget hostage for years because he wanted to break the unions?
Yes.
On the other hand, Governor Pritzker and Democrats in the General Assembly have successfully passed 5 balanced budgets since taking office, leading to 9 credit rating upgrades and millions of dollars saved for Illinois taxpayers.
Did you know we have a $2 billion rainy day fund in
Really?
Illinois now? Yes.
We should tap some of that because it was rainy as hell a couple of days ago. I believe I mentioned that at the top of this podcast.
Yes.
But it's just a metaphor. The article goes on, quote, the Illinois Policy Institute has spent years lecturing Democrats about fiscal responsibility when they should have been more concerned with their own books. These so-called experts might want to ask the governor for tips on how to successfully balance a budget, said DPI spokesperson Allison Janowitz. Allison, way to go. Put the knife in and twist it.
Start over, said DPI spokesperson Allison Janowski.
said DPI spokesperson Allison Janowski. Way to go, Allison. Put that knife in and give it a good hard twist.
Yes, and DPI stands for Democratic Party of Illinois. Mm-hmm. Hey, each week we post to our Facebook page and website an Internet Kitty sent in by you, the listeners. Don't forget, this week's Internet Kitty is still Lilac the dog. We're keeping Lilac until next week because Lilac's face is just so funny and so cute. Lilac is brought to us by our fake sponsor, Freshly Poured Pet Food. Whether you serve pet store perfection or dollar store dreck, your goofy-faced dog will sit on the kitchen floor and demand that the food they eat is only freshly poured.
Freshly poured, oh my Lord, it's freshly poured.
And again, you better visit Lilac at our Facebook page or website, proleftpod.com. You will get a giggle out of looking at Lilac. And you can send your Internet Kitty dog or other pet to us, and do make it a silly picture. We love those. At our email address, proleftpodcast@gmail.com, where you can also write to both of us. If you send us an internet pet, please put Internet Kitty in the subject line. Thank you. Feel free to write to us. We love hearing from you. Be aware that if you write to us at any of our addresses, we reserve the right to read your email or U.S. Postal Service. Go, Postal Unions! Letter on the air unless you say otherwise.
Don't forget our gourmet coffee guidelines. If you can afford to buy an espresso-based beverage for yourself, hey, buy one for us. This isn't charity, this is our job. If you can spare $5 a month, please spare $5 a month at patreon.com/proleftpod. Please share our show on social media, and if you love this podcast, please forgive us for all the technical difficulties you've been through today. If there were one more thing had gone wrong, you'd be getting this podcast on vinyl in the mail. So please get someone else to listen to our high-tech digital version of the podcast as well, and thank you for doing that.
Hey, Driftglass, how are the Internet Kitties doing this week?
Well, Blue Gal, the Internet Kitties want to emphasize that black cats are not glitches in the Matrix.
Thank you, Driftglass.
I love you, Blue Gal, and we'll get through this somehow. We're going to get through this. We can do this together. Together.
Let's think about living.
Think about living.
Just think about loving.
Think about loving.
Just think about the hooping and the hopping and the popping and the loving, lovey-dovey. Let's forget about the wine and the crying, the shooting and the dying, and the fellow with a switchblade knife. Let's think about living. Let's think about life.
The Professional Left podcast is recorded under a Creative Commons license. Copyright 2024-25, GGBG Productions.